Hey everybody, welcome to Open Door Philosophy, a podcast where we talk about philosophy. I am one of your hosts, Derek Parsons.
And I'm the second host, Andrew, the curious trolley car driver.
Oh, very nice. Very apt today, because today we are talking about Philippa Foot, one of the Oxford Four, a continuation of our series on the Oxford Four. Philippa Foot is certainly famous for probably, we were debating this before we started, probably what is the best known thought experiment in philosophy, which is the trolley problem.
Yeah, no doubt. I think that's absolutely right. If you're not familiar with that, then we will certainly talk about it later. But I think that this is probably, even if you don't know anything about philosophy, I think this is like the problem that everybody talks about. It's been in TV shows and movies and everything. And we've talked about it too on this podcast before about how much I don't like it. But let me say something before we start too. I will never do the intro again because I listened to, on our last episode, well, maybe I can, but I need a script. But I listened to the last episode and I think I messed it up for the first time in 86 episodes. Do you know what I did?
You messed it up. Now, what'd you do?
I said, welcome to the Open Door Philosophy podcast.
Oh, you put a the?
Yeah.
Wait, welcome to Open... Oh,
yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm the one who edits it, so I didn't catch it.
Well, I was very disturbed. Write us in if you were disturbed as well, and I'll offer a sincere apology.
I'm so sorry you're disturbed by it.
Absolutely disturbed. Anyway.
Well, how are you doing other than being disturbed?
Well, that's pretty much been it. That's been my focus since the last episode came out, not messing that up again. But other than that, doing pretty okay. I've been at home. I'm technically on summer break, I guess, which might be I guess it's not going to be my last, but I'll be starting up law school in a few weeks. So that's exciting. And in that time, right now, I have been reading a lot, but I think the book related to philosophy right now is one that I've been meaning to read for a while, called Anarchy, State and Utopia by Robert Nozick, which is a fascinating book. The premise behind it is basically, well, I don't know how to explain it basically, but he's trying to imagine an alternative state. He's trying to say, okay, if we justify the state's existence and the state, what it wants to do is maximize freedom, could we imagine another existence where a state doesn't exist, where we have just as much or even more freedom? So it's pretty interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely a famous one when it comes to political philosophy.
Yeah.
Nozick's the libertarian, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, the hyper libertarian.
Yeah, so he's thinking about instead of states, okay, the big thing that would make someone question is, okay, what happens to protection? Because the state offers protection and stuff. So he imagines these state agent. They're not states. They're like protective agencies that you pay for the area that you live in. So it's kind of funny, it's very dystopian kind of, but I'm sure he wouldn't say that. Anyways, what have you been up to?
Well, we had a little hurricane since we recorded last. So like you and the rest of Houstonians and surrounding area.
Yeah, that's true.
No, just dealing with all of that, and it's fine. Everything's fine. We're fine. But it was quite a journey this last week or two.
Absolutely.
With all the power outages and damage. We had no damage to our property, but there's a lot around us. And anyway, other than that, I've just been sitting around. Oh, I did go back to work. That's right. I went back to work this week.
Whoop,
yes. So, back at it. I'm at work about 2.5 weeks before teachers report. So anyway, doing that. And as far as reading goes, I'm reading Stephen King's The Stand. This
has been a year-long endeavor to get to this point, right?
Oh no, that was the previous book I was reading, Holly. No, The Stand is the very thick, almost 1,200 page magnum opus epic story about which will sound very familiar these days. It was written in 1979, but the government has been working on a super flu that will wipe out the population, and it just happens to get out, and it does wipe out the population, and that's what the story's about. So anyway, The Stand's very famous. You've heard of it, right, Andrew?
No, but I'm
Recent
not a big
title.
Stephen King guy.
Really? Okay.
I'll
Yeah,
have to
it
check it
was a
out.
it
That
was a
sounds good.
miniseries in the '90s, and then someone else made it into a miniseries like sometime in the 2000s. But if you want to categorize a book, as far as like an epic, it's not a poem, but multiple characters across multiple storylines, and yeah. So anyway, I'm about 800 pages in of the 1200. It weighs 4 pounds. I weighed it the other day.
Yeah,
But after that, I don't know. I don't know what I'm going to do. I got a whole stack here.
I can't get into any kind of horror or anything like that. I remember I read some of the Goosebumps books, and I think I pressed
Uh-huh.
my luck too far. My luck too far, not my luck. I pressed my luck too far, and I found one that I didn't like. So after that, I've never read a horror book again. It's great.
Yeah.
Aristotle would be glad of my courage.
Well, you know who else Aristotle would be pleased with? Such a bad segue. Anyway, Philippa Foot is who we're talking about today. So
Cool.
our girl Philippa, it's like such a British name. It's a overtly hyper British name. It's actually quite English, and I love that there's a double P in Philippa. but but anyway, Philippa Foot. That's right. She was one of the Oxford Four. We introduced the Oxford Four last week. That is Murdoch, Anscombe, Foot, and Midgley, four women who came out of World War II, looking to change philosophy. Well, I don't know if they were looking to change it, but that's what they did, and a lot of it was through moral philosophy, which is what we're largely focusing on our 4 or 5 episode arc here. And last week, or rather last episode, we looked at Iris Murdoch, and this week we are tackling Philippa Foot. So after that, I believe we got Anscombe up next, and then Midgley. So everyone
It's
look forward to
exciting.
that. Yeah. So Philippa, just age-wise, she lived to 2010. She was born in 1920 and died in 2010. So she was 90 years old. Most of these women were well, I hate to say old. Use the word old, but they were old. Midgley was 99, and so Philippa was 90, and they all worked very late into their lives. So, yeah, today we're looking at Philippa Foot, revival of virtue, I guess we could say. A lot of virtue with these four women. So
Philippa Foot, she was born in 1920 in England, of course, as you mentioned, from an English family, but I believe that she has some relation in the United States. When I was looking, she has some relation to Grover Cleveland, uh,
oh, that's right. I forgot
somewhere
that.
in her line, which I believe there was another. I believe it was Murdoch actually who also had ties to the U.S., but I guess we have
Hmm.
the big English American soup, so it's not that surprising. Yeah. Anyways, Philippa, I'm sure she came from somewhat from the research it seemed at least. I couldn't find anything about her economic status, but I believe that she was
Oh, she came from a wealthy
yeah,
family,
I
if I
think
recall.
yeah, she had an uncle or father or something who was in the military, so she came from some deal of money. And she went to Oxford, of course, as we mentioned. She's part of this term, Oxford's Four. And this was, of course, from the last episode, warring years in England. I believe she was there from 1939 to 1942, when England would have been in World War II. And she was friends with Philippa Foot, Iris Murdoch, Anscombe, although I believe that she was a year younger than Murdoch and Midgley and 2 years below Anscombe, if I'm remembering that correctly. Anyways, maybe it's not. You feel free to correct us, but I believe there was some difference in their ages by a slim bit. While she was at Oxford, she said that she liked the theoretical ideas of philosophy, but she wasn't good enough at math to do math, which I thought was funny. And so that's why she studied this degree at Oxford called philosophy, politics, and economics.
Hmm.
which I don't know if we see the latter two, but we certainly see the philosophy later into her career. What she and her peers note during that time is she was wrapped up in debate with a lot of these philosophers of the time. And she's attributed as saying something like everything she learned was from Anscombe, from her debates with her, which I believe she also attributes and recognizes that everything Anscombe got was from Wittgenstein. So there's a bit of a play off of those people. In Iris Murdoch's writing, there's a diary entry from her that's kind of describes the atmosphere of that time and all of their relations together. And so what she notes here is she says, argument with Pip, who's Philippa, and Mary Midgley, about naming feelings. M said, case of indefinite color. I said at least one can look at the color. Pip said she had a queer feeling, which she named Hubert. Not, of course, a logical proper name, H, has certain characteristics, otherwise couldn't be named. What is it to be Hubert again? What do you think of that? I mean, it's funny, but
I think it's funny. I also
yeah,
love that they color Pip.
yeah. Is that a common nickname of Philippa, or is that?
I don't know that Philippa is common. I don't know that it's common enough to say that Pip is the shortened version of it. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, I know that there's Pippin. There's the name Pippin, but
Yeah,
you know.
that's one of the characters in. Yeah, of course.
I guess it's got to be a take on Philip,
Yeah,
Philippa. Yeah,
probably.
but I mean, what do I know?
Yeah,
Not
I'm.
much when it comes to the name Philippa.
Well,
That's what I know.
it's
I know that
funny.
I know nothing.
Yeah, okay, that's the best answer. I remember at when I was in this church camp when I was he had a ye lassie. Is that the right name? Is
Elassie?
ye lassie? That's what the great British people would say, right, or Scottish people.
Oh,
Anyway,
oh, yeah, 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 yeah.
anyway, they would say Jesus is always the answer if they asked a question. So in philosophy, it's the only appropriate answer is that you know nothing.
That you
So
know nothing.
yeah.
That's good.
But I think that this journal entry, it's interesting because I think it uh, prefigures some of the later philosophy which they're engaged in, which is, of course, as we learned from last week, is discussion about feelings and moral attitudes towards things. She's, what is it to describe a feeling? And she says Hubert, but she can't describe it any more than that.
Oh man, I was reading this last week a an article on the ineffable, and it was talking about the difference between Eastern and Western philosophy, and it was identifying this notion in Eastern philosophy that we certainly have the opposite of in the West, and that is an emphasis on language and words in the West, and we use those to describe things, whereas the East is quite comfortable with certain aspects of existence, just saying like, we cannot put words to this. We cannot put words to this experience. And so that Hubert thing kind of reminds me of that. If you think of like Japanese haikus, like they're very short. There's a reason for that. It's because they don't want to say too many words. And and so it was interesting. He was talking about this experience at a Shinto temple and how the people said nothing. They go up to the altar, they perform some things, they wash their hands, they do some ceremony, but there's no creeds, there's no doctrines, or there's nothing that they say. It's all an inward expression of this experience, and so they're like, yeah, we just don't use words for a lot of things. That's very Taoist too. If you're familiar with Taoism, you cannot name the Tao. So I don't know. All that made me think of the Hubert thing. Made me think of that. Like, we don't know what this feeling is, so we'll just call it Herbert.
Well, if I'm remembering correctly, something that Foot said was that she never read I can't. I think she said this. She was having a conversation with Anscombe much later in their life. Anscombe, of course, her mentor was Wittgenstein, and Foot said something like, I never told you because we never talked about his work or anything like that. But I was reading him in that time or something like this, and Anscombe said, well, why didn't you tell me? Like, this was my big interest. And I can't remember what Foot said, but I think the point that you bring up is a good bit of highlighting on an issue that these women were, of course, influenced by. But at the end of Wittgenstein's great what is it, Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus,
Hmm.
the last line of that is, whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent.
Yeah.
And so we can see, I think, of course, as we mentioned last week too, that we're coming out of this rich logical positivism. They're coming out of this rich tradition and being influenced by that. Um, but language, I guess, for them is, I mean, it's not only a very important philosophical movement of this day, but for them, it's like their mentors, the people. That's the flavoring in the water that they're drinking. I mean, so that might be why they have a focus on it.
Yeah. 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 For sure. Um, and that's a great segue to start talking about her book, Moral Belief, maybe as a
Absolutely.
paper,
Yeah.
1958, which was a response to a moral theory that came out of a logical positivist uh, heritage, if you will, by A.J. Ayer. I believe he coined the term in Language, Truth, and Logic, his book, Language, Truth, and Logic, as this viewpoint called emotivism.
Let's talk about for a second what is emotivism. And
Mm-hmm.
I think this is one of the more interesting philosophical positions that come up because I could see it, although I don't agree with it. I think it's very attractive in being true. What
Oh, I do
emotivist
too.
Yeah, what emotivists would say is that if we take any statement about, let's say, about an ethical belief, because I think that's the most interesting. If we say something like murder is wrong, well, they're going to say, okay, well, what does that really mean? That comes from a rich tradition. But what they would say is something like, what when we say murder is wrong, what we're really saying is something like, I feel like murder is wrong, or murder feels wrong to me. Sounds weird, uh, but it's a statement about your feelings towards the action, or
Mm-hmm.
something like that. Um, do you have a better way to put this, or a better example?
Yeah, well, yeah, I'll use the classic yay boo example
Sure.
that I believe he uses in the book,
Yes.
which is, if you imagine you're at a football game, he of course was talking about soccer, but if you're at a football game, let's say it's Chelsea and Arsenal, you're an Arsenal fan, so you're like boo Chelsea, uh, and you're like yay Arsenal, and there's nothing really to back up that particular yay boo that you're doing. It's just that you don't like Chelsea and that you like Arsenal. And it's the same with morality. This is a very morally relative viewpoint of
Absolutely.
morality. And so it's the notion that, yeah, I don't like murder. Um, I like people not being murdered, which is the equivalent of boo murder, and then you might say, yay, charity or something. But there's nothing objective that tells you charity is good, or nothing objective that says murder is bad. It's just how you feel about it. And that's why they call it emotivism.
Absolutely. That's great. Yeah, that's a great example. I think that this position, of course, it's coming out of its day and age, whatever, blah, 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 blah. But I think it's difficult to respond to because it seems more plausible to me from the outset that that is what we mean when we say something like murder is wrong, or it's wrong to steal, or whatever. That seems more plausible to me than saying there's some abstract philosophical concept of,
Objective moral
yeah, of
truths. Yeah.
objective morals that's just
Yeah.
floating out there in the world. And murder is a part of the bad, and giving charitably is part of the good. And so what we're saying when we say murder is wrong or charity is good is that those are categories of good and bad. I mean, the, saying that they're a statement about how we feel about them seems more plausible to me than that, in some
Yeah.
sense. And so I
Yeah,
think
and well, I think the reason for that is, and everyone has this experience, right? Is that we do look around the world and we see different cultures that have different customs, and something might be acceptable in one culture but not acceptable in another, and morality is typically tied to those things. And so we see that there's this great variety of moral differences across cultures, and so emotivism seems to make a lot of sense, right? I
absolutely.
mean, you can take lots of examples. You know, you can think of I don't want to go like extreme stuff, but we can talk just say like clothing customs, right? And what is considered morally permissible, how much skin, for lack of a better term, is permissible to show versus not, versus covering up, and uh, and so that's a good example of it. So we see this differences in culture. And we're like, well, actions are moral actions, and so all that's tied to morality. So there is no such thing as objective morality. It's all relative and it's based on our feelings.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's exactly right. So something that's interesting about Foot, I think so, is that really all of her work, it's kind of like what what's that great Gordon Ramsay, a beef Wellington. See, I'm on it today with these analogies. All of her
Beef
work is kind
Wellington.
of like a beef Wellington, where I think it's created, and I'm trying to run with this, but I don't know if I can. Uh, it's it's all a continuation along, I think, very similar ideas that are all building up to this book that she writes at the end of her life called Natural
Mm-hmm.
Goodness. But I and that's kind of different from a lot of philosophers, I think, nowadays, where they'll pick and choose multiple topics, and while they might have one underlying string, they're all working in kind of different areas.
Mm-hmm.
Moral Belief is one of her early papers, although it's not the earliest. It's an early paper where she's really beginning to define this, and it's a response to emotivism, as Parsons has said. And so, what she is, the basic point of the paper is, okay, when we're saying murder is wrong, that is not a statement of how we feel about it, but it's instead something that's we're saying that that's a recognition of some fact in the world. Uh, it's not simply an opinion or it's an emotional response. Instead, it would be akin to something like saying murder is wrong is analogous to us saying the sky is blue. And so here in this paper, she begins to lay out what she will later define more over the course of her philosophy. Why is murder? Why, when we say murder is wrong, is that why is that a fact? Why is it a recognition of a fact? Well,
Mm-hmm.
it's because it really is recognizing property in us, which is grounded in our nature as human beings. And so, this, I think, in this article, she brings up for the first time this concept of natural goodness, and I guess
Mm-hmm.
by akin that would be natural badness. And this will go to her idea of virtue. She argues that we have certain traits and qualities and properties in us, and I'm trying to think of a good example of this. It's so difficult to explain, I think, Foot by timeline, because I think it's like all a continuation. She's
Mm-hmm.
developing her ideas over time even more. But let me give an example of this, and we'll flesh this out later, I think, when we talk about natural goodness.
Yeah.
For Wolf, when we say, okay, the goal of human beings, and this is very Aristotelian, is that we're good. What does that mean? Well, in us we have properties, blah 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 blah. But the goal is for us to be good humans. And when we do bad things, of course, that changes us, but it prohibits us from being good.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
when we do things that are not good, we're basically, this sounds so weird, but I think it'll make sense in a second with an example. We are using ourselves and our abilities in a bad way that we're not meant to be used, or we're not meant to be done. So think about a knife. Actually, yeah, think about a knife, a really sharp kitchen knife that you'd use to cut a beef Wellington. Let's say that I pick up this knife, I can open a package with it. Sure, like I can do that. It can be done. Sure, but it's not really what it's used for. Like it will cut open the package, and it'll work. It'll be fine for that. But it's really not the purpose of how this is to be used. It also kind of
Hmm.
messes the knife up. It might give it like a nick or something in it, and yeah, and of course we can think of even more extreme examples. Like I could think about using a kitchen knife to make myself a bowl of ice cream, like scoop the ice cream out or something like that.
Uh-huh.
And that sounds wild, and it of course messes up the knife. It's not how the knife should be used. It's analogous to the way that uh, Foot sees us with, the moral actions that we commit. When we do things
Hmm.
like murder, it's like, yeah, we totally we can do it. It's not good for us. It messes us up, among other things. So that's a very brief and probably too broad example of what she means by moral goodness. But in this paper alone, what she's trying to establish is okay, when we make moral claims about the world, they're not simply expressions of our feelings about them. Instead, they're recognitions of properties in us and our
Hmm.
judgments about, okay, are they making us better or worse?
Right, right. And that's going to take us, directly to the Aristotelian line of thought and thinking.
Right.
When we use the knife poorly, we are not that knife is not thriving anymore, for lack of a better term.
Right.
And when when you're talking about the knife with all the hurricane stuff, I was thinking about yard equipment you use to cut down trees
Yeah.
and cut down limbs and stuff like that. You have like hand trimmers. You have like loppers. You have like weed eaters and chainsaws, and all those things cut, but they're designed to cut differently. And if you've ever used, and everyone's done this, I think, if you're trimming up a shrub or whatever, and one of the limbs you need to cut are just maybe a little too big, and you should probably go get the loppers, but you don't
Yeah.
want to walk all the way around the house to the garage to get them. So you take those hand shears and you squeeze as hard as you can, and maybe use even both hands to cut through that limb, and boom, you do. But it took a lot of effort, and you look at your hand trimmers, and hey, guess what? You've bent them a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
and now they're not going to be as effective, using it on other things. So anyway, that was kind of a long example, but
No, that's
another
great.
good example, if you're talking about, this idea that everything has a purpose, and everything has proper usage, and if you use that thing improperly, you might get the job done, but it's not done well, and you've done some damage along the way. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. I think that's good. Yeah.
Well, we will definitely return to virtue. It's all kind of wrapped up. It is interesting, Andrew, like you said, so much of Philippa's work is holistic. And actually, Midgley's quite similar. I think she wrote 18 books, 17 books,
Yeah.
and a lot of similar themes along them. And, it's a challenge to kind of take it all and put it into, one nifty little paper that covers all of Philippa's thinking,
Yeah.
because it's all intertwined, which is great. I mean,
Yeah.
but we can't get out of this episode without talking about the trolley problem, the famous trolley problem thought experiment. So if you are unfamiliar, this is how it goes. So there's a railroad track, and it splits into two railroad tracks. On one of those tracks is tied 5 people, and they will get run over by this trolley. On the other track is one person, and they could also possibly get run over by this trolley. There is a switch that switches the track from one track to the other, from one that goes to the track with 5 people and one that goes to the track with one person. And you are the person standing there that's going to have to choose the switch to pull. In other words, you're going to make a choice to kill 5 people or one person.
Right.
And so that's the trolley problem, and it's been used, oh my gosh, it's like overused to illustrate all kinds of things. And quite frankly, all the things that the trolley problem is used for these days isn't exactly how Philippa used it in her philosophy, which is kind of funny. It's
Yeah.
close to it. And by the way, just for fun, if you're bored one day, Google images and type in trolley problem illustrations, and there's 100,000 of them, and it's always the same illustration, but people add to it and manipulate. It's really kind of funny.
And
Um,
something along with that too is there's a MIT. I believe it's a way to teach cars, like self-driving cars,
mm-hmm,
try to teach them moral intuition for these things. And
mm-hmm.
so MIT actually has this, I believe they still have it up, but it's been a while since I checked. A It's kind of like a game where it gives you situations like this,
Yeah.
well, should the car swerve over and hit these people or these people, the criminal or the baby, and so it's pretty interesting. Yeah, check that
Yeah,
out. It's fun.
yeah. I can see it's like the Oregon Trail for trolley problem,
That's right. Yeah.
Oh man. Okay, so anyone listening to the trolley problem, the explanation of the trolley problem, can pretty quickly see that we're talking about, what is the greatest good here, to kill one person or to kill five people, and all kinds of questions
Yep.
result from that, right?
Yep.
Who are the people on the tracks? What does the trolley represent? And you just go on and on and on. So let's talk about how Foot used it initially. In moral philosophy, there's this theory that comes from Thomas Aquinas called the doctrine of double effect. So the doctrine of double effect asserts that when there is an action that has both good and bad effects, if the bad effect is not intended, that's okay. Even if it's foreseen in some cases, that's okay. And I think we can probably think of some situations in our own lives where, a decision that we're going to make has both good and bad consequences to it. So without a dramatic sort of example here, an example could be like, my mother is sick and I need to go to her house and care for her over the next week. But I also had some very important meetings set up, and those will have to be canceled, and the people involved in those meetings will not benefit from those or whatever. Uh, there's two choices here. Uh, and making the choice has both good and bad effects. I don't know if that's a good example.
No, that's
To be more dramatic, we could talk about self-defense, right? And I believe this is what Aquinas himself talked about.
yeah.
Killing an aggressor. If someone is attacking you, right? We call it self-defense. Killing an aggressor is morally permissible if the primary intention that you have is to save your life, right? And do your best not to kill the aggressor in saving your life. But even though, an outcome might be that the aggressor dies, that is permissible because you have saved your own life. And when we talk about the consequences being foreseen, even if you foresee that the aggressor might die, which obviously that's going to be a possibility if you're defending yourself, then it's still morally permissible, even though it is foreseeable that is a possibility that they will die, which would be considered a morally wrong action to take a life. So anyway, that's my. That was a little longer than I meant. Anyway, doctrine of double effect. You probably know that actually better than I do.
Well, I think it was a good
What did I leave
explanation.
out?
No, I think it was a really good explanation, and I think it can also highlight. I mean, of course, this trolley problem. I guess I'll get back to it in a second. But this trolley car problem illustrates, I think, some problems with what later, or maybe at the same time, from Anscombe would term consequentialism and
Mm-hmm.
deontology, of philosophy. Uh, it's a good way to illustrate them. But I think that puts, although I don't, from what I remember when reading her, I don't know if she necessarily answers this problem. I think she raises it more, but she highlights some possibilities with it. Because if you say it's a problem, then I would want an answer to it. I, but I think that, anyways, uh, I think the cool thing about Aquinas' doctrine of double effects here is that it seems to me to be more human in ways of thinking about things and responsibilities. Uh, I was just thinking when you were talking about your examples of Kant has this famous problem in one of his papers on lying about is it permissible to lie, and or is there a scenario where it's ever permissible to lie?
Yeah.
And he, I believe, comes to the conclusion that no, there's never a morally permissible reason to lie. And the example that he gives, or it's a scenario that he raises, I think in conflict with this idea, which is a great example. This is not the example that he uses, but I think it's a more clear illustration of it. That imagine you're in World War II, you're in Germany, a Jew comes to your door and asks, "Okay, can you hide me? I'm trying to escape from the Nazis, and if they get me, they're going to send me to a concentration camp." You say, "Of course, yeah. Come in. I have a secret bunker below. I do this all the time." So Nazis come to your door. They say, "Okay, we saw a Jewish person running around here. Are they in your house?" Um, for some, if you're holding too closely to ethical principles, uh, into these kind of formulaic ethical systems,
Hmm.
then some of them would tell you, like deontology, that it's never permissible to lie. So what's the deal here? I might have to say that they're there because it's never permissible for me to lie, or it might be doing some people some amount of good. It might do the Germans more good than this just one person. Not that I'm saying that it's good. But I think here it's like, okay, well, I'm going to lie to save the person's life.
Hmm.
And I'm going to, I mean, it's not my intention just to say, oh, nana, nana, boo, boo, I'm going to lie to you. That's not the intention there. So I
Right.
think that's good.
Yeah. 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 Good example. Yeah. When you're starting to talk about Kant's uh, thought experiment, I was like, oh, well, this is a hiding a Jew during World War
Yeah,
II thought
that's the
experiment.
classic one.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah. Yeah. It is. Yeah. And yeah, of course you're like, of course I'm going to lie.
yeah,
I'm going to try to protect this person's life. And if I have to lie, that's fine.
yeah,
But Kant says, according to his construct, that is not morally permissible. You never should lie. And there's all kinds of reasons for that.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, that's a good example. So we get to this trolley problem. So Foot's issue was that she thought sometimes the particular amount of moral weight that we give to intentions over consequences. So we're talking deontology versus utilitarianism, but intentions over consequences, what we mean to do versus what results from an action. This might be misplaced or exaggerated. So she comes up with this trolley problem to try to illustrate this, right? It illustrates situations where the doctrine of double effect would permit actions that seem morally wrong or prohibit actions that seem morally permissible. She compared this to other ethical theories. Of course, she's going to go back to virtue. But she says, virtue ethics and consequentialism. She argued that a virtue ethic approach, which would focus on the moral character and the context of actions, would prove a more nuanced and realistic account of a moral decision making than the rigid distinctions made by doctrine of double effect. Does that make any sense, Andrew?
Absolutely. No, that's good. Yeah, and you have something below here, but I think it's I think it's good in your critique of consequentialism too. I think that
Well, I'm just trying to think, to unpack this trolley problem a little more, and we're talking about intentions and consequentialism, and neither of these maybe address this trolley problem very well. But with intention and doctrine of double effect, you're like, well, I have to kill one life to save five lives, right? That's the trolley problem. That is permissible, and she wants to challenge that idea that is an acceptable solution to this trolley problem. And so she circles it back towards, rather than a deontological viewpoint or a consequentialist viewpoint, she wants us to look at it from a virtue standpoint. And it's not about the actions or the consequences we take, but the character of ourselves in that decision making process.
absolutely. I think that's a good way to well, it just seems quite clear to me that I believe in there's this online database called uh, Open Phil People or something like that, or
Oh yeah, yeah.
it's a Phil database.
Mm-hmm.
And a few years ago, they did this again, and the results aren't as easily accessible. But basically, they used to have a huge survey of like all of the people who worked at um, philosophy graduate programs or top philosophy graduate programs across the world. And they took a survey where they would have their philosophical viewpoints basically, and you could click on their profile and see their answers. And I believe, though, that most philosophers now, I can't remember what it was, fall into the deontology side.
Mm.
Uh, and I can't remember if it was just a slim majority or like a low majority. I can't remember, but it was most, and that always just struck me as odd. And I think this is a good like this is a good reason why, I think, because I think the clear solution. I mean, I don't think there's a clear solution to this problem, but I think that deontology and consequentialism has a tendency to oversimplify problems,
Yes.
or oversimplify, the decision making and the answer to these things, as we'll see. But
Actually, I think that segues really good to this little last section that I
yeah,
had on foot, which is specifically a critique of consequentialism. You used the
absolutely.
term too simplistic, and that was her argument. She said consequentialism is just simply too simplistic because it only considers end results and neglects so many other factors. So here's an example. She believed that so back to intention, believed our intentions and the more principles we follow are crucial in judging whether an action is right or wrong. Just focusing on consequences totally misses the point. Well, not totally, but can miss the point of why certain actions, like telling the truth, why are these inherently valuable, no matter what the outcomes are. And she said, like this results in, and for anyone that kicks around consequentialism or utilitarianism enough, arrives at this conclusion. There's some disturbing conclusions that comes out of this, right? Like if you're only aiming for the greatest overall good, you could very easily justify harmful actions because it might benefit more people in the end. Again, you can think of 100, World War II examples.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
and so Foote found this really troubling. That she says, going back to this notion of virtue and natural goodness, which I believe we're talking about next. She says this goes against our basic sense of justice and fairness, right? That it's okay to firebomb this city because there's a munitions factory there. Sure, it will kill a couple thousand human beings, but it will save the lives of potentially tens of thousands of human beings. She's just like, that goes against our basic sense of justice and fairness.
Absolutely.
And so she argued, that more morality is just more complex than just a numbers game, right? It's more complex than maximizing happiness or utility. And so that's her critique of consequentialism.
And let me just try to put the last little bit of stitching on this beef Wellington that we've been cooking. If someone jumps to this part in the episode, they're going to be like, "What the heck is going on?" But
Beef Wellington.
I think we
I'm
need
hungry.
to we we need to notice the similarity between this criticism and her earlier, in what she's baking in, you know, what she's getting at. It's not that different. This is all a big critique, or it's not a. It's both a critique on this preference and dependence upon rationality for our moral decision making, and it's a gesture or a placing back on the track for us to realize, to identify goodness as a bit of decision making, and is the correct way maybe to think about decision making, but also that goodness is an objective trait that we can see in the world. Let me give an example of this. Although certainly she's not saying that practical reason and rationality should be discarded completely from the equation, I
Right.
think what she's saying more along the lines of is that there's more to decision making and ethical decision making than solely practical reason and practical goodness. example time. So imagine that you're going up the stairs at the apartment, or you're in the grocery store or whatever, and you see an elderly person who's bringing out groceries to their car, or walking up the stairs with a bunch of groceries in their hands. In a split second, you decide to help them, uh, because you recognize that's the right thing to do. That's the appropriate, because there's something good in that.
Mm-hmm.
In a second, you think, I mean, this would all happen in a moment of seconds in your head. That would probably be a feeling, really. It would be a
Mm-hmm.
feeling to do a good thing, just from my own, I'm not saying that I do this or I'm some superhero, but it would seem to me like that first snap would be not a calculation in your head, but a
Mm-hmm.
feeling. Then you think in your head, okay, how can I help this person? Then you calculate in your head, you use your practical reason to determine, okay, what's the best way for me to help? Well, I need to go up, I need to offer for me to help them. I need to say, okay, can I get your groceries? Can I help you with this? Or can I open your door? There you're using your reason to help. But primarily, and first of all, the first thing that you're doing there is you're recognizing the goodness. Then you're making a choice. You're deciding, okay, how should I help them? Then you're using your reasoning to determine, okay, what's the best way to help. And so for here, with the past, for Foot would be like 400 years of dependence on the rationality and kicking the can of goodness down the road. What she's saying is, hold up on a second. We need to recognize goodness is a primary player in this, and recognize that feeling that she talked about at Oxford, Hubert, so many years before, is like a really important part of the equation. And in bringing it back to this trolley car problem and the critique of consequentialism, is that if we are denying that feeling, that propensity or inclination towards goodness, or badness, really, that's the whole pot and pan of the thing. Like that's a
Mm-hmm.
big player in all of us. Then we can say, okay, the reasoning process that you made in making that decision, okay, maybe it's good, maybe it's not, maybe it was correct or incorrect, but the fundamental feeling that you had is a really important player.
Yeah, I love this example you give, and it really makes me think of it's kind of this flow chart of decision making, right?
Yeah.
So you have this elderly person, and you might say, when you see this elderly person having a difficult time with their groceries, you're like, oh geez, I have a choice here to make. I can either help her or not help her. But Philippa says we got to back up even further, and
Hmm.
there's something before that choice, right? And so you think of flowchart, at the top here we have goodness, right?
Yep.
And that feeling that you're talking about, the Hubert, is that helping this person with their groceries is good. Like that's a feeling you have that you should do, and then comes the choice, right? The choice comes second. You choose to help. You choose to help based on the goodness and the feelings, like, and the choice you make, it has everything to do with that feeling, um, of goodness that should be cultivated within you. And then your rationality kicks in, and you use that rationality to decide the best way to help. I think a lot of people's decision making, how they view decision making in moral situations, is they immediately say there's a choice, and they're using their reason to figure out which choice is best. But Foot says that's not the role of rationality in morality. The choice you make is based on goodness, and then you use that rationality to figure out how to best help.
Absolutely. I think that's right.
So a lot of that's outlined in one of her later books. She was 81 when it was published. It's Natural Goodness. And this book kind of pulls together all of her ideas that she's been developing since her time at Oxford. And so she really lays out in a very, and certainly in an Aristotelian fashion, this is why we say this is the revival of virtue ethics in the realm of morality, ethical morality. So again, back to that function, right? She believes that we have a function, just how, like, plants and animals have natural functions, we have natural functions. So a good tree produces good fruit, and similarly, a good human, what is good for us to produce? Good actions. This helps us thrive. So when we're talking about moral objectivity, this is how she gets there. This is where she says, like, she gets to the point where, well, to argue against moral relativity, that there are objective moral truths that can be based on human nature. Midgley will help support her in through her writing
Yes.
about human nature. Midgley's first book was Beast and Man, and it has a lot to do with human nature. So we have some connection here. But that moral truths are based on human nature. That means it's objective. So there's certain facts about what makes a human life flourish, and these facts should guide our moral judgments. So what are these facts that guide our moral judgments? What is it to thrive as a human being? Of course, these are some classic, philosophical questions. What does it mean to thrive? How do you live a good life? All that good stuff. So our goals: surviving, socializing, using our minds, using the rationality that comes along with being a human being. These help us decide that actions are good or bad. So that goes back to that whole human nature thing. And Andrew, earlier you mentioned practical reason, which is thinking about how to live well as humans. She says practical reason will lead us to these moral virtues, right? If we just follow the trail, right, of human nature and what it is to live a good life, and to what a life of thriving looks like, you will, through practical reason, arrive at the proper moral virtues, because these guide us in ways that fulfill our natural purposes, right? That's how we get to this idea of moral objectivity, which again is one of her big projects, starting out all the way back with moral belief in 1958, responding to the moral theory of emotivism.
Yeah, I think that's a really good. It feels like a cone to me or something. Like all of this work has and I like you point out, has come to give us this. It's like a lifelong project to give us
Mm-hmm.
this description of moral facts and these sorts of things, which, of course, I think is just it's a renaissance or so of
Mm-hmm.
virtue,
Yeah.
for sure. I mean, really, this stuff is nothing new, but I think that the pages are colored a little bit from Aristotle describing, okay, how do we come to determine these facts, and and what's, I think that something that these philosophers add in this time is, I think that they color in goodness is a natural inclination, which definitely plays into I think a good explanation of things, but also goodness as a feeling too. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's so important, and it's a good reason to believe that these are natural properties of ourselves as human beings. Now, a problem that I used to have with this, and let's kick this around for a second,
Sure.
is okay. What do we say? I would say, like, the vast majority of people, they have an inclination, I think, towards the good. Like, they can suppress it.
Mm-hmm.
I think actually everyone wants the good, and we'll talk about that in a second. But there's some people who, like sociopaths or psychopaths, who actually don't have this feeling in them,
Mm-hmm.
where they're actually naturally their natural inclinations are not towards what we would say is good,
Yeah,
but it's
they're
actually towards bad
amoral,
things.
right?
Yeah, towards the immoral, and that's really doesn't seem to like be any fault of them. It actually just seems to be like, genetic or something like that. Like I don't really. I mean, they could do bad things, and we can say they're bad, but I don't know if we fault them as much as someone who um, does it for any reasons. So how would we talk about these kind of people?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I can remember some past episodes when we talked about Aristotle and people with mental retardation. How can they
Yep.
benefit? How can they benefit from the good? What is a thriving life for a person who has an IQ of 50? And then the same question you bring up here. These are outliers to the argument, and it doesn't mean they're not important. It's a great question. I don't know the answer to it, honestly. You're right. A sociopath could, for whatever reason, or rather, a person, for whatever reason, could have sociopathic tendencies. And why does that person have that? Why is there a kid who, the example of the kid who likes killing kittens when he's a child or
Yeah,
something.
great.
Why? How, how does that fit into this model? And I don't know that I have a really great response to that. I guess my response is it seems that the vast majority of human beings has this tendency towards goodness. But I mean, it's a good counter argument. Just because the vast majority of human beings, that makes it seem kind of relative rather than objective. I don't
Yeah,
know. Where are you at with it?
yeah. So I think that something that Aristotle is free from that we are not is that Aristotle, I don't think, has any care for equality as much as we do. Like
Uh-huh.
in Plato too.
Yeah.
And so in Aquinas neither. Like this is a very new thing. Like everybody has to have access to these things.
Oh,
Uh,
that's true. Yeah.
yeah, and so Aristotle would say, yeah, okay, sure. There's going to be border outline cases in both directions. Like some people are going to be super primed to the good. Some people aren't. He could say, one, this is a case study of humans, like in the average, in the median, there's going to be outliers. Cool. That's just how the world is. Secondly, and Aristotle's actually, and I think Philippa Foot too, because she's an atheist. I'm just assuming this. Like, I think they're going to be pretty similar in this case. Like, they're going to say, yeah, this is just a case study of how humans are. Uh,
Mm.
and so that objection's not going to hold us as close for them. I think Aristotle could also stay, and I think Foot would also say this too. Uh, for these people, it actually might be like, actually they are still aimed at a good, like a good for them. Like they're not going to be doing things that are bad for them. They're going to also have this feeling of wanting to do something. They're going to be inclined to do something. How do we deal with that? Well, that's where this rationality component comes in.
Mm.
They actually have to learn. They actually have to learn to not follow their inclinations, which is not that different from us.
Hmm.
Like like I love donuts. I really like them, but and that's an inclination for me. But
Uh-huh.
I know I can recognize that that's actually like my body leading me away from the good. So maybe it's something similar for them. I'm not sure. Those are
Yeah.
two things to say.
Yeah. I don't know. This is a good response either. Let's take the scientific community, and their job is to say what is objectively true. And so, we've come out with a new medicine. The FDA needs to test it. We take 1,000 rats, and 5 of the 1,000 rats die.
Yeah,
All the other ones are just fine. And in the report, they will say it is true. I mean, this isn't how they would say it, but it is true that this medicine is safe.
yep.
Um, and they would take those 5 rats and just be like, these are the outliers. So I guess a question kind of is like, what is the importance or how much weight should outliers, carry when it comes to considering things such as this? If we were to, go with the morally objective test with rats, and 1,000 people have to make a choice that is good, and 5 people don't. Does that mean morality is not objective?
That's great.
And by that
Yeah.
same standard, I mean, I don't know.
No,
I guess that's the question, right? Like, what weight does the outliers carry?
that's great. I mean, yeah, that's a great, really, really good example. I think of. I mean, like it's.
Well, thanks. I just came up
No,
with that on the
I,
fly.
I think it's good. It's like this also happens in humans. I think like there's these polio vaccines that can cause like bad side effects in people, and like for the vast, 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 vast majority of people, it's a great like it's gonna save your life. Like it's gonna or
Hmm.
not save your life, but prevent you from like a really debilitating
Yeah,
illness. But for
yeah,
these very few, I think it's a great example.
yeah, yeah. Well, okay. Well, I guess we did it.
Yeah, we're done. We
All
footed
right,
it.
Philippa Foot. We give it the boot.
Yeah,
I don't know.
that's good.
Let's give
I
this
was
episode
thinking
the boot.
I was thinking at the beginning of this, if we still did our episode ads, in
Oh
between,
yeah,
this one would
yeah.
be this one would be a real kicker.
Oh man, that's funny. It's good stuff. And congratulations on using that beef Wellington example throughout. I don't know if you planned that or not, but of course, beef Wellington is a very English dish.
It is, yeah. Hopefully it was a scrumptious analogy.
That's quite delicious. I'm kind of wanting one now. I don't know where to get one.
Never had one. Yeah, you should look for beef Wellingtons.
I mean, there are English. There's a couple English pubs in Houston. Like a proper pub with a full menu and everything. I bet you they have all kinds of English cuisine. Beef Wellington.
We should do this.
Would certainly be on the. We should do it before. Should we do it before you leave town?
Yeah, let's do it. I'd like that. Yeah.
Okay. We'll try to figure it out.
All right, everybody. This is going to be it for today's episode, but don't get too excited. We still have 2 more episodes on the Oxford 4 to complete.
Actually, do get excited.
Yeah, do get excited.
Get excited.
That's right. We have 2 more episodes. We're going to cover Elizabeth Anscombe and Mary Midgley, which is going to be a blast. So we will have to continue on. I think all of these philosophers really have intertwined philosophies. So if you're interested in what you heard today or last week, you're going to hear a continuation on in 2 weeks.
Yeah. And give us a shout if you'd like. You can reach us by email at contact@opendoorphilosophy.com, or we are on the Instagram at Open Door Philosophy. That's our Instagram. Yeah. And I guess that how else can we be reached? Oh, the YouTube. We're on YouTube as well. So give us a shout if you got some comments or corrections or anything, whatever.
Also, remember to subscribe and follow our podcast so you know when episodes are released. I realized
that's
that was
a good
something new. Yeah, that we haven't done.
We haven't said that in a long time.
Yeah, so make sure to do that. And remember, when your life is in need of some philosophy, the door is always open. Have a great week.
See ya.
See ya.